A crystal glass shattered before it reached his mouth. "Careful, little spark," the Mafia boss said, as if I hadn't just started a war with my wrist. Men like him mistake mercy for weakness. Tonight, he'll learn the difference. Sofia Marino had come to the Salvator Winter Gala to plate desserts and leave before midnight. 24, flower on her sleeves and rent 3 weeks late. She knew exactly how to keep her head down in rich men's rooms. She just didn't know the most dangerous man in Chicago would notice the one moment she didn't. In 2 minutes, she spilled a poisoned drink down a guest's $1,000 suit. In 2 hours, she was locked inside a mansion where every door weighed more than her old life. The secret her father left behind had been sleeping in a grease-stained recipe book for 7 years, and it would either save Dante Salvator's empire or burn both of them inside it. When Dante looked at her across the broken crystal, I think part of me understood before the rest did. Nothing in my life was ever mine again. The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the sound, a soft click, gold against crystal. His ring tapped once against the side of his tumbler, while a room full of rich men pretended not to watch him. The ballroom at the Palazzo Verdi glowed honey gold beneath chandeliers the size of small planets, and every waiter moved like fear had been built into the carpet. I was standing near the service doors with a tray of blood orange tarts balanced on my palm, trying to remember that I was here to finish a shift, collect cash, and go home. Then the man at table 12 lifted Dante's drink from the wrong side. It was such a small thing, a swap so smooth most people would never have seen it. But my father had trained my senses the way other fathers taught baseball: sugar stages, butter temperature, citrus oils, the difference between toasted almond and bitter almond, the difference between fragrance and warning. When the waiter passed me with the glass meant for Dante Salvator, the scent hit the back of my throat. Whiskey, orange peel, smoke. And underneath it, wrong. I didn't think. Thinking would have cost time. Dante lifted the tumbler. I crossed the polished floor before any part of me decided whether this was brave or stupid. My free hand shot out and caught his wrist. Every head in the room turned. His skin was cool, hard, not because of muscle, though there was plenty of that under the dark suit. Because the whole man had the stillness of a loaded weapon. His black eyes came to my face, and for one impossible second nobody breathed. "Don't," I said. The guest beside him, silver tie, cruel mouth, too much cologne, barked a laugh. "What the hell is this?" I knocked the bottom of the glass with my tray hand. Amber liquid fanned across the white linen and down the guest's jacket in a shining arc. He surged to his feet so fast his chair skidded. "She spilled my drink," he snarled, voice thick with public outrage. "You stupid little—" Dante stood. He did not move quickly. That was worse. The room changed around him. Men who had been pretending to chat went silent. The band seemed to forget its own song. 2 guards appeared at Dante's shoulders from nowhere at all. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might be sick, but I did not let go of his wrist until the empty glass tipped from his hand and broke on the table edge. The guest rounded on me. "You apologize now." I let Dante go and stepped back. My hand shook once, only once. "No," I said. The word surprised me as much as anyone. The guest stared as if ordinary women did not say that word to him. Maybe they didn't. Dante looked at the puddle on the tablecloth, then at me, then at the man dripping whiskey and fury. His expression barely changed. "And you're going to thank her for it," he said quietly. The guest gave a hard little laugh. "For ruining a custom jacket," Dante's gaze never left his face. "For keeping poison out of my throat." A silence rolled outward like thunder. Someone near the far wall dropped a fork. The guest's color changed first to red, then something weaker. "That's insane." "It smells wrong," I said, because no one else was saying anything, and I suddenly understood that I had stepped into a place where silence could get people killed. Bitter almond under the smoke. I worked pastry with my father. He taught me to catch ruined extracts before they poisoned a whole batch. The guest sneered, but there was sweat at his temple now. You think a bakery girl understands? Dante lifted one finger. The man stopped speaking. That was my second lesson about Dante Salvator. The first was the ring against Crystal. The second was that men listened harder when he was soft. One of his guards bent, lifted the soaked napkin from the table and smelled the whiskey. His face went flat. He passed it to another. That one swore under his breath in Italian. The guest lunged backward. He did not get far. Hands closed on his shoulders, another on his arm. Chairs scraped. Women stared into their champagne like none of this existed. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But beneath it, some terrible clean instinct had settled into place. My father used to say that panic made amateurs and precision made survival. Maybe grief had finally hardened into something useful in me. Dante turned to me fully then, and I hated the leap my pulse gave at being looked at like that. Not warm, not kind, interested. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia Marino." His eyes sharpened at Marino, just for a second, so slight I might have imagined it if I hadn't still been vibrating with adrenaline. "You work for the caterer?" "Yes." "Do you always touch strangers like that, Sophia Marino?" Heat rushed into my face. "Only when they're about to die." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. It felt more dangerous than one. A server nearby made a tiny choking sound that might have been laughter, and then wisely turned it into a cough. Dante looked at the guest again. "Take him downstairs." The man started shouting then. Innocence, mistake. He didn't know what was in the drink. He had children, he had lawyers, he had a senator on speed dial. It all washed over the room and changed nothing. I watched Dante watching him, and that was my third lesson. He never looked angry in the way other men did. No bared teeth, no flushed skin. No theater, just absence. Like Mercy had quietly stepped out of the room. When the guest was dragged away, Dante faced me once more. "You should be more frightened than you are," he said. "I am frightened." "Then why are you still standing there?" "Because my knees had locked. Because if I moved, I might shake apart." Because his ringed hand still seemed to exist against my palm like a burn. "Because I was right," I said. Something unreadable passed over his face. One of the guards approached him and murmured, "Boss, the kitchen entrance logs." Dante lifted his hand slightly and the guard fell silent. His attention stayed on me. Entirely. It was not flattering. It was possession without permission. An assessment so complete it made the back of my neck prickle. "Little spark," he said, and the name landed cold between us. "You just spilled blood you can't see yet." I should have run then. Maybe I would have if he had shouted or threatened or acted like the kind of villain ordinary women knew how to fear. Instead he spoke like a door closing. "You don't go home tonight." I had never known silence could have weight until I heard it inside Dante Salvator's house. The mansion stood above Lake Michigan behind iron gates and stone lions with chipped mouths, the kind of place that belonged in another country or another century. By the time they brought me there, the night had gone flat and cold. My phone had been taken politely, which was somehow more humiliating than if they had snatched it. My apron still smelled like burnt sugar and orange zest. My hands smelled like whiskey and the faint metallic trace of the man I had stopped from drinking it. A woman in black opened the front doors before we reached them. She was in her 50s maybe, dark hair cut severe at the jaw, eyes too sharp to belong to hired staff. She looked me over once, shoes, skirt, shaking fingers, and then looked at Dante. "You brought home trouble," she said. Dante shrugged out of his coat. "No." Trouble followed her. He handed the coat to her, and I saw then how ordinary movements changed in his presence. The people around him were not exactly afraid every second. It was stranger than that. They arranged themselves around his gravity. The woman's gaze returned to me. Maria Conti, house manager. If you break anything valuable, do it where I can see it. I'll try not to. That's what everyone says before they bleed on the marble. For the first time that night, I almost smiled. A man came clattering down the corridor, with the doomed energy of someone who had never learned to move quietly. He was broad-shouldered, beautiful in the way old church statues were beautiful, and carrying a plastic container full of celery sticks like it was medicinal equipment. "Boss," he said, then stopped short when he saw me. "Oh, this is the girl." "This is Sophia Marino," Dante said. The man nodded solemnly. "Paolo Rixi, driver, logistics, occasional miracle worker. Currently on a diet so tragic it may qualify as a hate crime." Maria closed her eyes briefly. "No one forced you to call it a funeral diet." "It's all I eat," Paolo said. "If I die, tell my mother I fell in battle not surrounded by celery." Despite everything, a laugh slipped out of me. Paolo brightened. "Thank God," she laughs. I was afraid the boss had brought home another silent person. We have too many of those. The hallway echoes with repression. Dante gave him a look. Paolo responded by crunching celery with martyrdom. I was shown to a bedroom on the second floor, larger than my entire apartment, with pale curtains and a bed that looked expensive enough to have opinions. The windows faced the Black Lake. The door did not lock from the inside. I checked. Maria noticed. "Don't test the outside," she said. "It does." My spine went cold. "Am I a guest?" She folded 2 clean shirts over a chair. "That depends on how badly someone wants you dead." She left before I could answer that. I did not sleep. At 6:30, I heard footsteps in the hall and the low murmur of Italian below. At 7, Maria brought coffee so dark it looked vengeful and informed me that I had 20 minutes before Dante wanted to speak to me. "In what capacity?" I asked. "In the capacity of a man who is not used to being surprised." The study smelled like leather, cedar, and cold morning air. Dante stood at the windows, phone in one hand, the lake behind him, making the room look arranged for him specifically. He ended the call without greeting me. "Your cousin Alina says you're alive," he said. A small knot in my chest loosened. "You contacted her. You were in my house all night." Someone needed to keep her from calling the police. So thoughtful. His gaze lowered to my coffee cup, then to my face. "You're angry. You abducted me. I protected you. Those are not mutually exclusive." A pause, then maddeningly, "No." I hated the tiny pulse of laughter in my throat. I hated more that he noticed. He moved to the desk and set down a folder. Inside were photographs from the gala kitchen, staff rosters, timestamps, security stills. Efficient, precise. Ugly in the way competence becomes ugly when it is built for damage. "You will tell me exactly what you smelled when you smelled it, and who came near you before the drink reached me." I did. Every step, every tray, every hand. I spoke too fast at first, nerves turning my mouth loose, and then slower when I realized he missed nothing. He asked almost nothing twice. When I finished, he rested one hand on the desk. The signet ring flashed dull gold in the morning light. "Why didn't you ask for protection before you made a scene?" he asked. "Because if I was wrong, I would have ruined a rich man's evening. And if you were right," I looked at him then, really looked, the scar at his temple disappearing into dark hair. The stillness of his mouth, the fact that men probably mistook him for stone until it was too late, then asking permission would have killed you. Something tightened in the room. He said nothing for several seconds, and somehow that silence felt like stepping too close to a ledge. Finally he asked, "How did your father die?" The question struck so deep I forgot to protect my face. "Our bakery caught fire," I said. 7 years ago, he survived the fire. The debt after it, not so much." His expression did not change, only his hand did. One finger tapped once against the desk. Ring to wood instead of ring to glass. Same warning sound. "Until I know who poisoned that drink," he said. "You stay here." I laughed once sharp. "Do I get a vote?" "No. And if I leave anyway," his eyes held mine. Calm, certain. The dangerous kind of certainty that didn't need to raise its voice. You won't get past the gate. I set my coffee down harder than necessary. You can't order me around because you own half this city. A flicker. Less than half. I stared at him. That almost smile threatened again. Get dressed. Maria will show you the kitchen. If you're going to be angry in my house, little spark, you may as well eat first. I should have said something clever, something cutting. Instead, I stood there feeling my own heartbeat in my throat and noticing, against my will, that his hands were beautiful in a brutal way. I left before that thought could become a problem. As I reached the door, he spoke again. Sophia, I turned. The guest you humiliated last night is in intensive care. I slid under my ribs. Did he lived. I swallowed. Because of the poison, because he chose the wrong glass first. The door felt suddenly heavier in my hand. When I stepped into the hallway, Paolo was leaning against the wall with his celery container and a prayerful expression. Well, he asked in a whisper. Did he threaten to bury you in the lake, or are we working up to that after lunch? I stared at him. Paolo sighed. Maria says I joke when I'm tense. Personally, I think I'm delightful under pressure. Below us, somewhere deep in the house, a lock turned with a clean metallic clack. His rules had arrived, and they were not leaving. The kitchen was the only room in Dante Salvator's house that felt like a place human beings were meant to live in. Copper pans hung above the island. The marble counters held knife marks old enough to count as memory. Someone had left a pot of tomato sauce simmering low enough to turn the air rich and sweet, and for 10 whole seconds I could pretend I was somewhere ordinary. Then I saw the armed guard by the pantry. Not ordinary then. Maria handed me an apron without comment. You need when you're upset. I bake, I said. That wasn't an answer. No, I admitted. She nodded like I'd passed a test. Good. The men eat when they're afraid, the boss doesn't. It makes everyone meaner. By 10 o'clock I was elbow-deep in dough because my hands needed something repetitive to believe in. Maria did not ask me to work. She simply made room, and that kindness unsettled me almost as much as Dante's control. I roasted hazelnuts, zested blood oranges, browned butter until the whole kitchen smelled like home and grief together. Paolo wandered in around noon, drawn by hunger the way saints are drawn by miracles. Is that cake? He whispered. It's sponge. Same religion. Maria smacked the back of his head with a towel. Your funeral diet. My funeral diet, Paolo said darkly, never anticipated citrus. I laughed despite myself and kept whisking. He hovered, watching like a desperate Victorian orphan. What is it? He asked. Burnt honey cake, mascarpone cream, blood orange curd, sugar shell. Why a shell? I thought before answering. The sugar in the pan had gone from clear to amber, the exact edge between sweetness and ruin, because it looks hard before it breaks. Paolo went unexpectedly quiet. That's not about cake. No, I said softly, probably not. He considered me with sudden, disarming gentleness. Then he glanced toward the doorway and lowered his voice. If the boss asks, I'm going to tell him it was excellent and emotionally concerning. Why would the boss ask? Paolo's eyebrows rose so high they nearly left his face. You're new here, so I say this with love. Are you blind? I nearly dropped the whisk. He grinned. Ah. Not blind. I was saved from answering by Enzo D'Amico entering the kitchen with a file tucked under his arm. He was older than Dante by maybe 15 years, silver at the temples, immaculate even in exhaustion. If Dante was the blade, Enzo looked like the ledger balancing the blood after. His gaze found me, then softened into professional wariness. Miss Marino, Mr. D'Amico, you can call me Enzo. Everyone does, except Paolo when he wants a favor and Maria when he deserves consequences. I've been emotionally abused all morning, Paolo said. Have some celery, Maria replied. Enzo set the file on the counter and lowered his voice for Maria, not low enough to stop me hearing. The poison came through a decanter from the private cellar. Someone inside had access. Inside. The word thudded in my chest. Maria's mouth flattened. And the girl, she stays. I turned back to the cake before they could see that hit me harder than it should have. Later, Maria sent up a tray to Dante's study and before I could protest, put the sugar dome dessert on it. Take it. I'm not serving him. You are carrying a plate upstairs. Try not to declare war this time. The study door was open. Dante stood over maps and numbers spread across his desk, his jacket discarded, tie loosened. He looked up when I entered and the room shifted around that attention again. I set the plate down. He glanced at it. I didn't order this. No one asked, and yet here it is. It was in the kitchen. His eyes moved from the dessert to my flour-dusted wrists. You made it. Yes. He took a spoon, cracked the sugar shell with one precise tap, and the sound splintered through me. I watched the spoon sink through cream, curd, cake. He tasted it. He closed his eyes for one breath, only one. Then he opened them and said, "You put salt in the caramel." It needed it. The smallest thing passed through his face. Approval maybe, or memory. It was gone before I could name it. "It's called," he asked. I didn't name it. You build a sugar shell over blood, orange, and bitterness and didn't name it. I looked at the window because looking at him felt unwise. If I had, it would have been too honest. A silence opened, thick, a handspan away from becoming something else. He set the spoon down. Your father taught you this. My father taught me that sweetness without tension is forgettable. That sounds like him. I turned so fast the room blurred. You didn't know him. Dante went very still. No, he said after a beat. Not well. It should have ended there, but something in me had been rubbed raw all day and his control made me reckless. You keep saying my name like it means something to you. His gaze locked to mine. For a second I thought he might answer. I thought I might finally hear one honest thing from the man whose house had swallowed me whole. Instead, footsteps pounded down the hall. Paolo appeared in the doorway, flushed and breathing hard. Boss, he said. Garage camera picked up a tail on the florist van, same plates from the gala service alley. The moment shattered, cleanly, like sugar. Dante's attention left me at once, and somehow that was worse than if he had shouted. He moved for his jacket, all softness gone from the lines of him. Enzo, he called. A shadow crossed the hall immediately. He was already turning back to command the house when his gaze flicked to me one last time. Brief, hard, holding something unsaid. Stay upstairs tonight, he said. You don't get to Sophia, just my name, quietly, but it stopped me. Then he was gone past Paolo and Enzo, and the house filled with the particular silence of armed men pretending to be still. I stood alone in his study, staring at the spoon he had left beside the broken sugar shell, and understood two things at once. Someone inside his world had already moved against him. And somehow, impossibly, I was already inside it too. By the fourth day in Dante Salvator's house, I knew the language of it, the first click of security bolts at dawn. The murmur of Italian beneath closed doors. The smell of espresso and gun oil traveling together down hallways too beautiful to trust. Maria humming under her breath when she was worried. Paolo speaking louder whenever anyone asked him not to. I also knew I should have left if given the chance. That knowledge did me no practical good. The chapel sat at the back of the estate, beyond a winter garden full of sleeping roses, and one deeply hateful stone swan Paolo refused to walk past after dark. I'm telling you, he said as we crossed the path that afternoon, carrying boxes of votive candles Maria wanted stored before a memorial mass. Those things remember faces. It's a statue. They all start that way. I laughed, and the sound felt strange in the cold air. Inside, the chapel was small and old, built of dark wood and white stone, warmer than the rest of the property only because memory lived there harder. Maria directed me toward a side cabinet. Paolo hauled boxes with theatrical groans about fasting and martyrdom. Then he froze. "Do you smell that?" At first all I caught was wax and old incense. Then something sharper slid under it. Smoke. Not candle smoke. Fresh. Paolo was already moving. "Out," he snapped, and the easy humor vanished from him so fast it scared me more than shouting would have. "Now, Sophia." A hiss came from behind the altar, then flame. It climbed the velvet drape in one hungry orange line. I dropped the candles. Glass clattered. More smoke poured from the sacristy door. My body moved backward, but my lungs seized halfway there. Fire had its own language too, one I hadn't wanted to relearn. My father shouting for the ledger, my mother coughing. Heat where home used to be. I hit the stone edge of a pew and could not seem to stand straight. My hands were open and empty and useless. Paolo cursed into his radio. "Chapel breach now, move." Then Dante was there. I never saw him enter. 1 second there was smoke and Paolo and the beginning of panic. The next there was Dante in a dark coat, face carved from something colder than the weather outside. He crossed to me in 3 strides. "Sophia," I couldn't answer. His hand closed around the back of my neck, firm, not gentle exactly, certain. He bent until his face was in my line of sight and the rest of the world narrowed to his eyes. "Look at me." I did. "Breathe." I tried. The drape fell in a burst of sparks. Someone shouted from the door. Paolo was beating at flame with a heavy cloth and swearing about saints, swans, and workplace disrespect. Dante touched my jaw, just once, a rough thumb under my chin. "In," he said. Now, air came, ragged first, then again. He took my wrist and put my palm flat against his chest. His heartbeat was steady. Mine followed because it had nowhere else to go. Only then did I notice he smelled like cold night air over cedar and something darker underneath. Rain on black wool. The outside brought indoors. "You're here," I whispered, not meaning to. His gaze changed, only slightly, enough. "I'm here." That should not have felt the way it did. He drew me behind him as 2 guards stormed past with extinguishers. The fire died fast. Too fast to be accident. Smoke lingered in white ribbons against the ceiling. Dante didn't let go of my wrist. In the gray aftermath, I noticed the chapel's side door hanging barely ajar. A clean line cut through the dust where someone had entered from the garden. A message. Paolo coughed blackly and leaned on a pew. "I would like it entered into the record that almost dying on low carbohydrates is deeply undignified." I laughed, shaky and startled, then immediately hated myself for it. Dante looked down at me. "You have smoke on your cheek." His thumb brushed there before I could move. Everything in me stopped. Not the world, just me. His hand lingered half a second too long, almost. Then he stepped back like the distance had been waiting for permission. Maria rushed in, face bloodless. She went first to Paolo, then to me, then to Dante in that order, which told me more about this household than 3 days of watching ever had. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," Dante said. "Not allowed. Yet." Enzo appeared at the doorway, took in the scene, and his expression hardened. "The guard at the garden gate is missing." Dante's jaw tightened. "Find him." Enzo looked at me. There was pity there. I hadn't expected that from him. "Miss Marino," he said quietly, "if you ever get a chance to leave this world, take it the first time." Before I could answer, Dante said, "Not helpful, it is honest." The air between them sharpened. Later, after the smoke had cleared and the chapel had been sealed, I found Dante alone in the corridor outside. He stood with one hand braced against the wall, head bowed slightly, the picture of composure, until you looked closely enough to see the strain in the tendons of his wrist. "You knew this place before today," I said softly. His eyes lifted to mine, flat, guarded. "My sister died in a locked sacristy," he said. There was no preface, no warning. The truth landed bare between us. I could not find words large enough for that, so I did the only honest thing left. I put my hand over his fist where it pressed into the wall. He looked at it as if even now he wasn't used to being touched without calculation. "I'm sorry," I said. His throat worked once. "Don't be." That was the moment I understood the shape of his restraint. He wanted something, maybe comfort, maybe my nearness. Maybe just 1 second where he didn't have to hold up the whole terrible architecture of himself. And he stopped before any of it reached his hands. He stepped back first. Always him first. That night Paolo ate contraband biscotti in the kitchen and swore vengeance on whoever had tried to burn him alive before dinner. Maria pretended not to hear him. I stood at the sink, scrubbing smoke from my palms that no longer smelled like smoke at all. They smelled like cedar. And the place on my wrist where Dante had held me stayed warm long after midnight. I made my mistake on the 5th night. The trouble with being frightened for too long is that eventually fear starts wearing the shape of reason. I told myself I only needed 5 minutes outside the gate, 10 at most. Elena had called Maria's kitchen line twice that afternoon, frantic because a man in a black sedan had been parked across from our apartment building since morning. I pictured my cousin pacing our narrow living room in socks, checking the peephole every 20 seconds, and the walls of Dante's house started to feel less like protection than selfishness. So I lied. I told Paolo I had a headache. I waited until the shift changed at the east corridor. I took the service staircase, shoes in hand, and slipped through the herb garden to the delivery entrance where the lock had not quite caught after the produce truck. For exactly 4 minutes, I thought I'd succeeded. Then headlights washed across the alley behind the bakery district, and a black SUV cut the street so cleanly I nearly screamed. Dante stepped out of the back seat before the engine had fully died. He did not slam the door. He did not raise his voice. He only stood there in a charcoal coat with the river wind pulling at his hair, and somehow that calm frightened me more than rage. "Get in." I tightened my grip on the worn leather notebook under my arm. Elena could be in danger, and you thought leaving my protection without a word would reduce that danger. She's my family. His eyes dropped to the notebook. "What's in your hands?" I should have answered immediately. Instead, I held the book tighter, and that was answer enough. His gaze sharpened. "Sophia, it was my father's. Get in the car." "No," the word shook. So did I. For one terrible second I thought he might take the decision from me physically. Instead, he dragged a hand across his mouth and looked up at the dark windows above us like patience was something he had once owned and recently misplaced. "I have men searching 3 neighborhoods because you vanished," he said, very quiet. "Paolo nearly drove into a fountain. Maria is praying. And you are standing in an alley arguing with me while carrying something somebody may kill for." The notebook felt suddenly heavier. My father's recipes lived in there, his handwriting. Flower-thumbed notes, burn warnings, delivery lists, half-finished ideas. After the bakery fire, it had been the only object of his I could save besides a box of cracked measuring spoons. I had kept it like a relic. "I found numbers in the margins," I said. Dante went still, completely. "What kind of numbers?" "Not recipe quantities, accounts maybe, dates." "Initials." My throat tightened. I didn't know what they meant until I heard Enzo talking about the private cellar. My father did event orders for rich clients, men like your people. I thought maybe he wrote things down where no one would think to look. Dante opened the SUV door and waited. This time I got in. Back at the house, Enzo spread the notebook across Dante's study desk under a green-shaded lamp. Maria brought coffee no one drank. Paolo hovered in the doorway, hair wild from stress, muttering about premature aging and my absolutely criminal disregard for road safety. "You left a note saying, 'Gone 10 minutes.'" "Don't tell anyone," he informed me. "That is not a plan. That is a hostage situation for my blood pressure." "I'm sorry," I whispered. He looked at my face and softened instantly. "I know." Dante did not. He stood at the desk, one hand braced beside the notebook, not looking at me at all. Somehow that was worse than anger. Anger would have acknowledged I existed. This felt like judgment. Enzo adjusted his glasses and turned pages carefully. "These are coded," he said, "not business accounts. Shipment marks, percentages, church fund transfers, Jesus." "What?" I asked. Enzo glanced at Dante, then back at the page. "Your father hid ledgers inside pastry ratios." I stared. My father was a baker. "He was also smarter than the men who threatened him," Enzo said. A note fell from between two pages when he lifted the binding. Single sheet, grease-stained, folded twice. My name on the front in my father's handwriting. My hand stopped working for a second. Dante picked it up, then hesitated. "Read it," I said, because I suddenly couldn't bear not knowing. He unfolded it once. His eyes moved quickly, then slower. Something changed in his face, not enough for anyone else maybe, but enough for me. "What?" I demanded. He handed it to me. "If you are reading this, Sophia, then the wrong men won. Trust the one who keeps his hands still when he is angry. He owed me once. He will hate that you know it. The book matters. Stay alive long enough to make him tell you the truth." I read it twice. 3 times, then I looked up. The room had gone very quiet. "You knew my father," I said. Dante's gaze met mine. There it was at last, not an answer, but the edge of one. "Enough," he said. I laughed once and it came out broken. "Enough to hide from me. Sophia, no." I pushed back from the desk so hard the chair legs scraped. "You kept me here, ordered my days, searched my life, and somehow this was yours to ration." His jaw set. "I was trying to keep you alive. You don't get to decide what truth I can survive." The words hung there bright and ugly. For a moment I thought he might come after me. He didn't. Restraint, again. It cut deeper every time. I left the study and cried in the pantry, because it was the only room empty enough to be humiliating in private. Maria found me there 20 minutes later and handed me a clean towel without pretending not to know. "He carries guilt like other men carry wallets," she said. "That doesn't excuse him." "No," she agreed. "But it explains the shape of the damage." In the kitchen, because I couldn't bear my own thoughts, I made dark chocolate torts filled with blood orange cream and covered them in a caramel shell, so thin it cracked if you breathed wrong. Paolo wandered in, saw them cooling, and crossed himself. "Is this an apology cake?" he asked, "or a revenge cake? I don't know." He studied the glossy shells. "Good. Those are the best kind." Upstairs, Dante did not come to my door. Downstairs, a guard was found unconscious near the east wall where I had slipped out. And in the gap between those two facts, betrayal took its first full breath. The ambush came on a wet Thursday night on Lower Wacker, where the city smelled like river water, exhaust, and old concrete. Dante had insisted on moving me to a secondary location after the guard by the east wall was found. I had not spoken more than necessary to him since the letter. He had not apologized. Of course he hadn't. Men like Dante did not apologize. They altered outcomes and expected that to count. I sat in the back of the armored sedan with Maria's rosary wrapped around my fingers and the recipe book tucked into a canvas satchel at my feet. Paolo drove. Dante sat beside me in a dark suit without a tie, one hand on his thigh, the other resting near the hidden holster under his jacket. Rain threaded across the windows. "You can keep glaring at him," Paolo said to the rearview mirror, "but if we all die tonight, I would like it officially noted that unresolved sexual tension is a terrible final atmosphere." "Drive," Dante said. "I am driving. I'm also preserving morale." I stared at the blur of tunnel light outside. "There is no atmosphere." Paolo made a small, sympathetic sound. "Denial." "Classic." Dante's hand twitched once, the nearest I had ever seen him come to smacking his own driver. Then headlights flared wrong behind us. Paolo swore. 2 cars. Fast. Everything happened inside a heartbeat after that. Dante shoved me down just as the rear window burst in a glittering roar. Glass sprayed my coat. Paolo yanked the wheel. Tires screamed. A bullet smashed through the headrest where my skull had been. "Stay down," Dante said. The car slewed sideways into a service lane. One impact from the left, hard enough to bruise bone. Another from behind. Paolo was cursing in 3 languages and somehow still making impossible turns. Then the front tire blew. The world snapped sideways. The sedan spun. Metal shrieked. My shoulder hit the door. Dante's arm locked across me like a steel bar. When we stopped, I was folded beneath him, breathless, tasting blood. Gunfire cracked outside. Dante was already moving. He kicked his door open, dragged me toward the floor well, and fired twice one-handed through shattered glass. Paolo came around the front with his own weapon, face transformed into something lean and merciless I had never seen under all the jokes. "Out the passenger side," Dante ordered. "Now," I crawled. Hands slipping on broken glass, knees slamming metal. He covered me with his body each time shots hit too close. In the half-second between flashes, I saw his face and understood why other men feared him. Not because he loved violence, because when it arrived, he became exact. We made the alley. Paolo caught my arm and shoved me behind a concrete pillar, while Dante advanced into rain, and muzzle flashed like the storm had been built for him. He shot one man in the thigh, another in the shoulder, not wasting movement, not wasting breath. A third attacker came from the blind side, and I heard myself scream Dante's name before I knew it was mine. He turned too late to avoid the knife entirely. The blade scored his ribs. Something inside me tore open. I snatched the tire iron from beside the alley wall and swung with both hands. It cracked into the attacker's wrist. He howled. Paolo finished the rest with terrible efficiency and then grabbed my shoulders. Sophia, eyes here, not there. But I was already looking at Dante. Blood darkened his shirt below the cut. Rain slicked his hair to his forehead. He looked wild for exactly 1 second. Not outwardly, not to anyone who didn't know how hard he held himself together. Then the mask came back down over the damage. He touched my face with his bloody fingertips as if confirming I was real and intact. "Were you hit?" "No." His eyes closed once, briefly. By the time we reached the safe house on the north side, I was shaking so hard I could barely undo my coat. The place was stripped bare except for one bed, one couch, white walls, cheap lamps. Security men checked the perimeter. Paolo paced the kitchen muttering about getting shot on an empty stomach. Then he stopped, looked at Dante bleeding onto the tile and pointed at him. "You sit down, I mean it. If you faint, Maria will adopt me and disinherit you." Dante ignored him until I took the first aid kit from the counter and said, "Sit." He looked at me. Then, astonishingly, obeyed. The cut along his ribs wasn't deep enough to need stitches, but it was ugly. I cleaned it with hands that trembled less once I had a task. He hissed when antiseptic hit skin. I glanced up. "You can complain," I said. "No, that isn't bravery, it's annoying." A breath left him that might have been laughter. I taped gauze into place. My fingers brushed the heat of his stomach, the flecks of breath under my knuckles. The room had gone so quiet I could hear Paolo deliberately rummaging cabinets 20 feet away to give us privacy without admitting it. Dante's voice came low. "You shouldn't have been in that alley. You were. That's different. Because your life is worth more," his gaze held mine, "because I knew what it would cost." The words lodged under my ribs. I stood too fast. He caught my wrist. There it was again. That impossible line running back to the ballroom, my hand, his hand, a life interrupted. In the kitchen, Paolo found an expired protein bar and declared civilization over. Dante did not release my wrist. His thumb moved once over the pulse there, not a caress exactly. Recognition. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it. "It wasn't the drink." I stopped breathing. "What?" "The first night." His eyes dropped briefly to our joined hands. "It wasn't the glass. Or the poison. It was that you caught my wrist like I belonged to the same rules as everyone else, like I could be stopped. My chest hurt. You can, no one does. The honesty of that was more intimate than touch. I should have stepped back, I could have. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, close enough to feel the warmth coming off him. Close enough that, if either of us moved wrong, the whole terrible, fragile architecture between us would finally give way. His free hand rose, stopped at my cheek, stopped again, restraint. One last time. I looked at him and said the only thing I had that didn't feel false. I'm not afraid of you. Something broke open in his face. Very small, very final. He kissed me like he had been refusing to drown. Not hard, not hungry first. Careful. A question asked by a man who had spent months learning silence, and only this 1 second forgetting it. I kissed him back, because not kissing him had become impossible 3 chapters ago. When his hand slid behind my neck, I trembled so hard he drew away immediately. "Tell me to stop," he said. I could not say I wanted him. The words were too big, too bare. So I told him the truth that cost me more. "If you stop now," I whispered, "I think I'll feel it for days." His forehead touched mine. "Little spark," he said, warmer than before, ruined by tenderness he clearly hated me hearing. War just started. Outside, somewhere beyond the safe house walls, Chicago kept raining. Inside, I knew with a cold, perfect certainty that nothing in my life would survive this unchanged. War sounded less dramatic than it felt. It felt like doors opening at wrong hours. Like men speaking in code at breakfast. Like Maria crossing herself before answering the phone. Like the city shrinking until every familiar street seemed to belong to someone armed. For 3 days after the ambush, Dante's world moved around me at a velocity I could barely track. Warehouses were swept, bank accounts frozen. 2 judges relocated to quiet vacation homes they had not chosen. A florist on Taylor Street vanished into federal custody. No one explained half of it to me, and somehow I understood enough anyway. I also understood Dante was angry with me in a way he had not yet forgiven. Not for the kiss, for the alley, for leaving the estate before, for existing where bullets could find me. He was gentler than fury and colder than kindness, which was its own punishment. Paolo wore his shoulder in a sling after taking shrapnel during the ambush, and refused to stop doing inventory one-handed. "If I die," he told the kitchen dramatically, "bury me under the good olive trees, not the ugly ones near the stone swan. I won't spend eternity being mocked." Maria pinched the bridge of her nose. "No one is burying you on landscaping. You say that now, but grief changes people," I laughed, then immediately stopped when Enzo entered with blood on his cuff, not his. My stomach dropped. "It's handled," he said too quickly. No one in a house like this said handled unless something had gone very wrong. By evening I learned what. One of Dante's younger men, Leo Morti, 23, all earnestness and bad coffee. One of the first people downstairs who had spoken to me like I wasn't dangerous, had been shot outside a warehouse in Bridgeport. Not killed, not immediately, but maybe because of information connected to my route, my notebook, my mistake. I found Dante in the greenhouse just after sunset, standing among sleeping lemon trees and damp terracotta with his phone dark in his hand. "Was it because of me?" I asked. He did not insult me with a lie. Partly. The honesty hit harder than comfort would have. I folded my arms tight across my ribs. "Is Leo going to live?" "Yes." The greenhouse glass clicked under rain. I looked at the rows of citrus, the lamps hanging gold over leaves, the impossible luxury of growing fruit indoors while boys bled in alleys for men like him. For men like this house. For this whole gleaming machine. "This is what it costs," I said. "Yes." Not sorry, not proud, just true. I hated him for that truth because it left me nowhere soft to land. "Then let me go." His eyes came to me slowly. The request did not shock him. That hurt too. "I can put you on a plane tonight," he said. New Mexico or Florence, new documents. Enough money to disappear. I stared at him, just like that. No, his voice lowered. Nothing about this is just like that. Would you stop me? A long pause, then, no. The answer split me open. Because I had expected bars, orders, one last command I could rebel against and turn into righteousness. Instead, he gave me the one thing that made the choice real: freedom. By 9, Paolo had my passport, a burner phone, and an overnight bag. He stood in my doorway holding them all with the expression of a man being forced to watch his favorite cafe burn down. "This is a terrible decision," he said, leaving, existing in a dramatic arc mostly. I looked at the rows of citrus, the lamps hanging gold over leaves, the impossible luxury of growing fruit indoors while boys bled in alleys for men like him. For men like this house. For this whole gleaming machine. "This is what it costs," I said. Yes. Not sorry, not proud, just true. I hated him for that truth because it left me nowhere soft to land. "Then let me go." His eyes came to me slowly. The request did not shock him. That hurt too. "I can put you on a plane tonight," he said. "New Mexico or Florence, new documents." Enough money to disappear. I stared at him, just like that. No, his voice lowered. Nothing about this is just like that. "Would you stop me?" A long pause, then, no. The answer split me open. Because I had expected bars, orders, one last command I could rebel against and turn into righteousness. Instead, he gave me the one thing that made the choice real: freedom. By 9, Paolo had my passport, a burner phone, and an overnight bag. He stood in my doorway holding them all with the expression of a man being forced to watch his favorite cafe burn down. "This is a terrible decision," he said, leaving, existing in a dramatic arc mostly. I managed a weak smile. "Paolo, he loves you," Paolo said bluntly, and then winced at his own courage. "There, I've said it. If he shoots me later, tell Maria I died brave and carb-deprived. I could barely breathe." "He hasn't said that." "Good." "If he had, I'd check him for a head injury." Paolo set the bag on my bed. "You're helping me leave anyway," I said. Paolo's mouth twisted. "That's because loving someone doesn't always mean keeping them." He glanced toward the hall, then back at me. "He thinks if you stay, you'll bleed for him. He thinks if you go, he'll just do the bleeding alone." Frankly, I find both options exhausting. By the time I made it downstairs, Maria was waiting with my coat buttoned to the throat and her car keys in hand. She didn't hug me. That would have broken something I still needed intact. "Alina is already moved," she said. "West of the city, temporary apartment, she's safe for now." "For now," I repeated. Maria held my gaze. "There is no forever in his world, only what you choose with open eyes." The front gates stood open when we reached them, actually open. Wet iron, black road, one dark sedan idling just beyond the drive. No guards blocking the way. No order shouted behind me. Nothing but the November wind and the shape of an exit I had begged for. Then a voice cracked over Maria's radio. "Enzo's down. Exchange compromised. Boss is moving alone." Maria went still. The cold reached inside my coat. "Why alone?" "Because Viri asked for the girl and the book." Everything in me stopped. Tommaso Viri. The name had lived in security reports and lowered voices, faceless until now. Suddenly he had weight, direction, teeth. Maria touched my arm. "Get in the car, Sophia." I looked at the open gate, at the road. At the life waiting on the other side, where I could still pretend none of this belonged to me. Then I thought of Leo bleeding on a warehouse floor. Of Enzo on the pavement somewhere, because roots tied to me had leaked. Of Dante walking into a trap with my father's book in the center of it all. Most of all, I thought of the envelope I had hidden that morning beneath the false bottom of my suitcase. The deed sketch and loan papers I had been saving for 2 years. The beginning of a dream to reopen Marino Bakery in my father's name. If I stayed, that girl was done. If I left, she was a coward. My hands shook once, then steadied. Sell the lease deposit, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Older. Use it for Alina. Nursing school rent, whatever gets her clear of Chicago. Maria's eyes changed, not softer, just sadder. Sophia. I'm not going, I said. The words hurt. That was how I knew they were true. I took the car keys from Maria, turned and pressed them back into her palm. Then I walked away from the open gate. Not dragged, not cornered, not saved from my own choice. I walked back into the house myself. Behind me, the iron gates began to close. And this time, I didn't mistake the sound for a prison. I chose the darkness at 9:17 p.m. and spent the next 4 hours learning exactly what that meant. Dante did not return before midnight. Neither did Enzo. Men came and went through the study with wet coats and blood at their cuffs. Maria took phone calls in clipped Italian and wrote names on a yellow legal pad, with enough force to tear the paper. Paolo sat at the kitchen island with an ice pack on his shoulder and a pistol within reach of the fruit bowl, muttering prayers so sarcastic I suspected God had started screening him. I sat with my father's notebook open beneath the pendant lights and translated grief into numbers. The code was pastry language built for men who would never look twice at flour. 32 ounces meant 32 crates. Bitter orange meant poison moved with the shipment. Feast day initials marked church collections used to wash cash clean. Every line I solved made me colder. My father had not just catered criminal men. He had documented them, quietly, stubbornly, the way good men sometimes become dangerous without ever meaning to. At 11:40, I found Tommaso Viri's name buried beneath a notation for almond cake. TV, Winter Cellar, Lucia Fund, 18%. Lucia. I stared at the page until the room blurred. Dante's sister's name, attached to a fund transfer, attached to Viri. Paolo leaned over, chewing the corner of a protein bar like it had personally offended him. That look means either revelation or food poisoning. Lucia, I whispered. Why would Tommaso use Lucia's name? Paolo's face emptied of humor so completely it frightened me. Because monsters enjoy blasphemy. The kitchen door opened. Enzo stepped in alone. For one irrational second, relief flooded me so hard I nearly cried. Then I saw his face. Not the blood on his collar, not the cut near his brow, his face. He looked like a man who had already been judged. Maria rose from the stove. Where is Dante? Enzo swallowed. Holding the river line, Paolo straightened. That's not an answer. Enzo's gaze found me instead. Sophia, bring the book. The world tilted. No, Paolo said at once. Maria moved half a step in front of me. Small motion. Iron meaning. Enzo looked older than I had ever seen him. Tommaso has 6 men at the chapel and another team waiting near the north docks. He wants the final pages decoded. He wants the girl because she can read what he can't. Paolo's hand dropped to the pistol by the fruit bowl. And you know this because I told him enough to keep my family breathing. Silence. The confession landed without drama. Maybe because the truth had been in him for too long to arrive any other way. Maria shut her eyes once. I heard myself ask, "What family?" Enzo laughed, and the sound had no joy in it. "My daughter." "Naples, her boy was born with a heart defect. Your father," his gaze flicked to the notebook, "helped me move money for surgery years ago. Tommaso found out. Then he found them." He looked at Paolo, then Maria, then finally the empty doorway where Dante should have been. I told myself I was slowing the bleeding, choosing the smaller wound. That is how men like me rot. Paolo's expression went ugly, hurt first, then fury. You sold roots. Leo nearly died. I know. You set chapel schedules. Enzo's throat worked. I know, Maria spoke without raising her voice. If Dante had been here, would you have told him? No. That answer hurt all of us. Enzo drew his gun and placed it on the counter. An offering. A surrender. Tommaso wants the girl at the old Marino bakery on Halsted. 1 hour. If we don't bring her, he burns the chapel with the remaining guards inside. My stomach turned to ice. The old bakery. Ash rose in my memory like it had been waiting. Paolo grabbed for his radio. Enzo moved faster than I expected from an injured man. He struck Paolo across the bad shoulder, sending him to one knee, then snatched the radio before Maria could reach the knife block. "Don't make me worse than I already am," he said, voice breaking on the last word. I should have run, screamed, fought harder. Instead, I made the choice before anyone else could. "I'll go," Maria stared at me. "Absolutely not. If he wants the code, he keeps me alive until he has it." I looked at Enzo. "And if I don't go, men die in the chapel because of a name I love." "Little spark," Paolo said hoarsely from the floor. This is the part where I object violently. I know. Enzo took us through the service exit. Only me and the notebook. No one else. Rain glossed the garden stones black. The hateful swan shone under security lights like an omen with feathers removed. In the car, Enzo drove with both hands tight on the wheel. "I did care for you," he said after 3 blocks. I stared out at the city. "That makes it worse." "Yes." The old bakery waited dark and hollow between a shuttered laundromat and a payday loan office that had outlived better decades. The sign was gone, the windows boarded. But I knew the slope of the roofline, the exact creak the back step used to make, the smell of old yeast trapped in brick even after years of smoke and winter. Inside, Tommaso Viri stood in the flower room like he'd been born for old ghosts. He was beautiful in the polished, expensive way that had probably made women trust him once. A little older than Dante, lighter eyes, same stillness but wrong somehow. Dante's silence felt like restraint. Tommaso's felt like appetite. He smiled when he saw me. "There you are," he said. "The baker's daughter who keeps interrupting men." Behind me, Enzo exhaled like a condemned man. Tommaso didn't even look at him when he fired. The shot caught Enzo high in the chest. He hit the wall, slid down it, and left a dark smear on the flour sacks stacked behind him. I screamed. Tommaso finally turned his head. "You see, this is why Dante loses. He keeps things he cannot afford." He stepped closer, elegant as a knife. "Decode the last pages, Sophia, before your boss arrives too late." Tommaso tied my wrists with plastic zip cuffs and sat me at my father's old prep table like we were about to discuss catering invoices. Enzo was still alive. That was the first fact I forced into place. He was on the floor against the flour sacks, breathing in short, wet drags, one hand pressed uselessly to the wound in his chest. His face had gone gray. Every time I looked at him, his eyes found mine with the bleak apology of a man who finally understood the exact price of his choices. Tommaso paced the room in slow, measured lines. "It's almost insulting," he said, turning a page in the notebook with manicured fingers. "Your father hid an empire in butter ratios. He hid evidence." Tommaso smiled. "Words are costumes, Sophia. Evidence to one man is leverage to another." Rain rattled the boarded windows. The old industrial mixer in the corner sat beneath a sheet of dust. Proofing racks leaned crooked where the fire hadn't eaten them all. And beneath everything, even now, the place smelled faintly of scorched sugar and old bread. Home, ruined and weaponized. Tommaso set the notebook open in front of me. "Translate." I looked at the page, I looked at Enzo, then I looked back at Tommaso. "No." He sighed as if I were being socially difficult. "You misunderstand the kind of evening we're having." I didn't answer. My heart was going too fast, but the center of me had gone oddly still. Maybe terror did that after a point, burned away the useless layers and left only function. Tommaso crouched so our eyes were level. Dante thinks being unlike his father makes him strong. It makes him sentimental. He cannot choose the necessary wound. His gaze dropped to my bound wrists. "You are proof." For the first time, I understood the mirror between them. Same discipline. Same violence. Same ability to ruin a room without raising a voice. Only one difference mattered. Dante stopped himself. Tommaso never had. I lowered my eyes to the notebook and bought time by reading the lines slowly. Sugar, almond, flour, feast day, cellar. Under the edge of panic, another part of my brain started taking inventory. The proofing cabinet still had a pilot line. The flour room vents were half blocked. There were ripped sacks near Enzo's shoulder leaking a pale drift across the floorboards. Flour dust. My father used to warn me about it with the seriousness other parents reserved for traffic. Fine enough in the air and one spark turned it into a bomb. I swallowed. Read, Tommaso said, so I did. Not the truth. Enough truth to keep him listening. I gave him dead drop addresses already burned. Account strings Maria had emptied 2 hours ago. Names of shell companies Enzo himself would know were obsolete. Tommaso corrected nothing. He wanted the final transfer line. Lucia Fund. He tapped it with one elegant finger. That one. I heard tires outside then. Hard stop. Car doors. Voices. Tommaso smiled without looking away from me. Right on time. Enzo made a sound from the floor. I thought he said run. Maybe pray. It didn't matter. I was already moving inside my own head. Tommaso rose and crossed to the back office where he could watch the rear entrance. 2 of his men took position by the front. Another stood too close to the ancient oven bank, rifle loose at his side, bored in the way dangerous men get when they think fear has done all the work for them. I scooted the chair backward inch by inch until its rear leg struck the lower shelf of the prep table. Metal tray, rusted edge, not sharp enough. Unless the guard looked over. Sit still. I let my shoulders shake, let him see tears. Innocence had always been the only armor this world underestimated. He smirked and looked away. I tipped the chair harder. It crashed sideways with me in it. Pain shot through my hip. The room erupted in curses. Before the nearest guard could grab me, I rolled, slammed my bound wrists against the broken tray edge once, twice, 3 times. Plastic bit. Split. Gunfire exploded from the rear of the bakery. Tommaso's men shouted. I tore one hand free and grabbed a sack knife hanging from the table peg. My first slash wasn't at a person. It was at the flour stack. White dust burst upward into the air. The nearest guard lunged. I flung a metal bowl at his face and ran for the proofing cabinet, hands shaking so violently I nearly missed the valve. Gas hissed. He grabbed my coat. I drove the knife backward, not deep, just enough to make him swear and stumble. Then I kicked the old oven starter. Nothing. Outside, someone shouted Dante's name. Inside, Tommaso fired twice. I hit the starter again. This time it sparked. The flash wasn't cinematic, it was worse. A violent puff of heat and white force that threw 2 men sideways and turned the flour room into a coughing blizzard. I fell hard, ears ringing, but I was still moving when the side door crashed open. Paolo came first, limping, gun drawn, hair full of rain and holy outrage. If I die in a bakery, he yelled, I want it noted this is not what I meant by carb loading. Dante was right behind him. He saw me. Everything else left his face. I got up because I needed to meet him standing, because surviving until rescue was not the same as surviving for myself. I took one step, then another. He crossed the last distance like a man outrunning the thing that had hunted him since 16. When he reached me, he didn't speak. Neither did I. He put both hands on my face and touched his forehead to mine once, hard, like a vow he didn't trust words to hold. Then the back office door slammed. Tommaso's voice rang out from behind it, amused and furious all at once. Bring the book, cousin, or I start with the old man on the floor. Enzo coughed blood. Dante looked past me, at Enzo. At the door, at the brother-shaped shadow waiting on the other side. His hands fell from my face, and I knew before anyone said it that one of them was not leaving that building alive. Tommaso wanted the final exchange at the chapel. Of course he did. By dawn, the city had narrowed to 3 locations: the ruined bakery, the river warehouse, and the chapel where Dante's sister had died, and Tommaso had been laundering blood through a charity named after her for years. Every road between them carried armed men. Every phone call sounded like static and prayer. Enzo survived the ride to the medic long enough to give Dante one last useful truth. "It wasn't your father alone," he rasped, blood bright at the corner of his mouth. "Tommaso lit the bakery fire to erase the books. Your father covered it to save the family." I covered him to save what was left. His gaze moved to me. Shame lived there, and something like grief. "Your father tried to warn me first. Then he looked at Dante the way men look at sons they failed. I'm sorry." He died before Dante answered. There was no time to mourn him correctly. That was another cruelty of this world. By 6 a.m., we were in the chapel crypt beneath the estate, with the notebook spread across a stone slab older than America. Maria stood beside me loading a spare magazine with hands steadier than mine. Paolo paced between columns with his shoulder strapped and his mouth running because if it stopped, fear might get ideas. "I'd like everyone to remember," he said, "that I was promised a driving job, maybe a tasteful stabbing once a quarter. No one said anything about liturgical warfare." "Paolo," Maria said. "I know, hush, I'm focusing loudly." Dante stood apart near the stairwell, jacket off, holster buckled, shirt rolled to the elbows over fresh bandaging at his ribs. The chapel bells above us had not rung since the fire attempt. The silence felt blasphemous. I went to him because not going had become another kind of lie. He turned when I stopped in front of him. The candlelight caught the scar at his temple, the exhaustion under his eyes, the blood dried in the seam of one knuckle he hadn't had time to clean. "Your father knew," I said softly. "Yes, you were going to tell me after." "Yes," the honesty hurt, but less than it had before. I looked past him to the stone stairs leading upward into morning. "Did you know Tommaso lit the bakery?" His jaw flexed. "I knew my father covered something, not until Enzo." "Is that better?" "No," the word fell between us like iron. For one impossible second I saw the boy he must have been, 17, maybe, inheriting sins still warm from older hands, told to call it duty or drown in it. I touched the edge of his sleeve. He covered my hand with his. "Little spark," he said quietly, "when this starts you stay below." "No," his eyes lifted. "He used my father's work, my name. My home." My pulse hammered, but my voice held. "You don't get to put me behind stone and call it protection." A long pause. Then very slightly he nodded. That was the moment he stopped trying to save some older, softer version of me. At 7:10 Tommaso arrived with 10 men, and a key to the side gate he should never have had. The first shots cracked through stained glass. The chapel filled with splintered wood, incense dust, and shouted Italian. Dante's men moved with terrifying discipline. Paolo dropped behind a pew and yelled, "I hate mornings," before putting a bullet through the knee of a man coming down the nave. Maria stayed at my shoulder with a pistol and the expression of a disappointed saint. We used the notebook for what it had become. Not evidence now, not history, but bait. Tommaso wanted the Lucia Fund account because it held the final ledger tying judges, priests, and politicians to his shipments. Enough to burn the city in court if Dante chose to turn it over. Enough to make Tommaso desperate. He came down to the crypt himself when desperation finally outran caution. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Same measured pace. Same appetite disguised as calm. "Still choosing the sentimental wound," he said as he emerged between the columns. His gun tracked from Dante to me. "You never learned." Dante stepped half in front of me without looking back. "I learned exactly what you are," he said. Tommaso smiled. "What we are. That was the heart of it, not cousin, not rival." Reflection. If Dante had decided once, and for all that love was a liability, if he had let the locked doors inside him stay locked forever. If he had taken every loss and turned it outward instead of holding it in until it poisoned him. They fired almost together. Tommaso's shot shattered a candle stand beside my shoulder. Dante's clipped his arm. Men surged from both sides. The crypt became noise and stone and muzzle flare. Maria dragged me behind a column just as Paolo cursed so creatively from the stairwell that even under gunfire I almost laughed. Then I saw it. Water. The old baptismal cistern line ran exposed along the crypt ceiling where restoration work had never finished. My father's notes had marked a pressure valve near the west wall because he once catered a memorial down here and complained for a week about damp flour sacks. "Dante," I shouted. "Left wall valve," he trusted me instantly. That was love in his language, not speeches. Movement. He kicked the wheel hard. Rust screamed. Water burst from the ceiling in a violent sheet, drenching the far side of the crypt where Tommaso's men had taken cover near the electrical box for the candle bank. The short was immediate. Sparks. Darkness, screams. In the blackout flash, Tommaso lunged for me. I saw his hand, nothing else, just the hand coming fast in the dark. Then Dante hit him. The sound of it was sickening, human. Final in a way bullets were. They went down together across old stone, cousins raised by the same dead family and broken in different directions. Tommaso got the knife free first. Dante caught his wrist, and there it was again, the gesture that had started everything. A hand stopping a hand before death reached the mouth of it. I moved before thought. Snatched the fallen pistol near the altar rail. Tommaso saw me and smiled, blood at his teeth. "Do it," he said. "Become him." I didn't shoot. Dante did, once. Center mass. Tommaso's expression emptied in surprise more than pain. He looked at Dante for a long second, like maybe he had really believed love would make him hesitate forever. Then he fell back against Lucia's stone and slid down it. The crypt went silent except for water and breathing. Dante stood over the body of the man he might have become. The gun lowered slowly at his side. Something had gone out of him. Not humanity. Something simpler, crueler to lose. The last possibility that he could end this war without killing his own blood. I went at him carefully, like approaching an injury. He looked at me, then at the notebook in my hand, soaked through at the edges. "Burn it," I said. His eyes searched mine. It took enough. He nodded once. By 8:15, the fire in the crypt brazier had eaten the last pages of my father's code. The judges' names had already been copied. The accounts sent to federal hands through channels Tommaso no longer controlled. The dead had their dead. The living had what was left. Above us, the chapel bells finally began to ring. And when Dante turned to me in the smoke and ash of his family's ruin, there was no victory in his face at all. Only the end. It was over. War ended messily. No one announced it with flags or speeches. It ended in arrests that made local news sound politely confused, in judges taking sudden leave, in two captains swearing loyalty to Dante, because Tommaso no longer had a pulse to frighten them with, in flowers arriving for Enzo's funeral from people who would never say his name aloud in public again. It ended in bandages and paperwork, and Maria finally sleeping 6 hours without a phone in her hand. Leo lived. That mattered more than I can explain. He came home to the estate with a limp, a scar high under the collarbone, and an insufferable sense of humor about hospital gelatin. Paolo cried when he saw him, denied it immediately, and blamed pollen despite it being February. "No one respects my immune system," he complained. "Also, Maria, if I die before 40, tell everyone I nearly survived nobly and then was defeated by broth." Maria, who had spent the past 3 weeks bringing him lunch and pretending it was not affection, put a container of baked ziti in front of him and said, "Eat before I bury you myself." Paolo looked at the pasta, then at her, then at the ceiling. "Madonna, I'm in." The kitchen laughed. Even Dante from the doorway let the smallest curve touch his mouth before it disappeared. That was how rebuilding happened. Not in grand moments, in ridiculous ones, in food, in someone remembering how much sugar you took in coffee, in grief making room for appetite again. By March, I was spending 3 days a week in a small storefront Dante had purchased without consulting me, and then had the decency to look guilty about afterward. It sat 6 blocks from my father's old bakery and smelled of fresh plaster, lemon cleaner and possibility. I hated that he bought it. I loved that he had saved the cracked brass oven thermometer from the ruins and set it on the new shelf anyway. I'm still angry about this, I told him the first morning we stood inside it alone. I know, it does not count as independence if a mafia boss funds it. No, he agreed, it counts as restitution. The honesty made arguing harder. I was arranging mixing bowls on the counter one evening when I heard the front bell ring, not the sharp store bell. The softer chime Dante had installed because he said the other sound was offensive. I turned. He stood in the doorway in a dark overcoat with melted snow on his shoulders and a small velvet box in his hand like it had personally insulted him. My heart did something unreliable. He crossed the shop slowly, past the flour bins, past the new espresso machine Paolo had christened the Widowmaker because it was too strong for civilized people. Past the display case still empty because opening day wasn't for another week. What happened? I asked. Nothing. That is not a box for nothing. No, he said. He stopped in front of the counter. Not close enough to trap me. Never that, not anymore. For most of my life, he said, I thought love was a doorway men died in. His voice was even, economical, which only made every word land harder. I thought if I wanted something enough, the only honorable thing to do was keep my hands off it until the wanting passed. Then you grabbed my wrist in a ballroom full of cowards and made the rest of my life impossible. My eyes burned. He opened the box. The ring inside wasn't ornate. Old gold. Small diamonds set like captured light, elegant enough to belong to a family that understood both beauty and threat. I can't offer you safety, he said, not the kind honest men offer. I can give you my name, which is complicated, my house, which you already know too well, my loyalty, which doesn't move once it settles, and every morning I have left. His gaze held mine, steady. No performance. If that is not enough, I will survive it. If it is, marry me. There was nothing fairy tale about the silence after. I thought of Enzo, of my father, of the bakery fire, of Tommaso dying under Lucia's stone, of the open gate, of all the versions of myself I had lost and the stranger, stronger one left standing here among clean counters and borrowed future. Then I thought of Dante in the safe house asking me to tell him to stop. Dante in the chapel trusting my voice in the dark. Dante choosing over and over to be less cruel than the world required. I put my hand on the counter because otherwise I might not stay upright. Yes, I whispered. Relief crossed his face so briefly I almost missed it. The depth of it undid me. He came around the counter then, slow enough for me to step back if I wanted. I didn't. When he slid the ring onto my finger, his thumb brushed my knuckle once. Reverent wasn't the word. Terrified might have been closer. Little spark, he said, and the nickname held no possession now, only wonder. You should know I had 6 more sentences prepared in case you said no. I laughed through tears. Were they good? No. Liar. Yes, he said, and kissed me softly before I could answer. Outside, snow tapped the front window. Inside, the espresso machine gave one offended hiss as its pressure settled. Somewhere across the city, men still carried guns in Dante's name. Somewhere else, mothers still told children to come home before dark. Nothing had become simple. But when he locked the bakery door behind us and handed me my coat before his own, the quiet that followed felt almost ordinary. And that was its own kind of miracle. 9 months later, The bakery opened before dawn, and my husband was late on purpose. I knew he was doing it on purpose because Dante Salvator was never accidentally late. He arrived precisely when he meant to arrive, whether that was for a meeting with aldermen in expensive suits or for Sunday lunch with Maria, Paolo, Leo, and half the surviving architecture of his criminal empire, pretending to be a family. So when the bell above the bakery door didn't ring at 5:45, I looked up from the croissant dough and smiled to myself. The shop had changed with the seasons. Early autumn now. Copper pans over the espresso bar. Lemon trees in the front window because Maria insisted every decent Italian establishment required them. A framed black and white photograph of my father by the register. A second one, smaller and harder one, tucked on the shelf near the back office. Lucia Salvator at 14, grinning into sunlight with Dante's eyes and none of his shadows yet. The first trays were in. Butter, yeast, coffee, sugar. The air held the kind of warmth that only work creates. Then the door opened. No bell. I frowned, looked up, and saw Paolo holding the clapper still between two fingers. "Security breach," I said. "Romance operation," he corrected. "Different division." Behind him, Maria carried 2 boxes of figs and the expression of a woman resigned to loving idiots. Leo followed with fresh flowers for the front counter, and a scar that had settled into his face like a permanent instruction not to waste second chances. And behind all of them came Dante, coat folded over one arm, tie loosened, watching me with that same unreadable attention that still had the power to pull the room quiet around it. My pulse misbehaved. Paolo set down a bag of pistachios and sighed dramatically. I would like the record to reflect that I was promised a quick delivery, and instead have been trapped in a marital pageant before sunrise. Also, Maria made me carry fruit, which is not a protein. "You'll survive," Maria said. "That remains under review." The others drifted toward the front of the shop with the practiced politeness of people making space without naming why. Dante came behind the counter. Not close enough to corner me. Close enough that I noticed, because I always noticed, the cool smell of outside clinging to his wool coat over cedar and darker things. Close enough that I saw the tiredness at the edges of him from whatever dawn meeting he had walked out of to be here. He set a small crystal glass on the counter between us. My breath caught. It was ordinary almost. Old cut crystal, heavy base, sunlight catching in the ridges. The kind of glass I might have ignored on any other day of my life. Not on this one. Not with him. "I found it in storage," he said. "The gala." "Yes." I wiped my floury hands on my apron too quickly. "Why?" Instead of answering, he reached for the bottle of sparkling water beside the espresso machine and began to pour. The sound was delicate, domestic, harmless. Still, my body moved before thought. My fingers closed around his wrist, exactly there, exactly the same. His hand stopped over the glass. For a second, neither of us spoke. The whole bakery seemed to tilt around that one point of contact. Flour on my hands, his pulse under my fingers. 9 months of marriage and survival and ordinary mornings folded back into a ballroom, a shattered glass, a life divided into before and after. His eyes lifted to mine. "There," he said softly. I swallowed. "There what?" "The thing." His voice dropped lower. "The reason." My chest tightened. He set the bottle down untouched and turned his hand just enough to lace his fingers with mine. No audience left in the world could have made him do that a year ago. "When you stop me," he said, "you do it like my life is not a throne or a weapon or a family legacy, just a life." Mine, his gaze held me still. "Do you know what that costs me, little spark?" I could only shake my head. "It makes me want to deserve it." Tears came so fast I laughed at myself. "That's unfair before breakfast." "Yes," he said. "I've become softer, it's humiliating." I moved before I could overthink it and pressed my forehead briefly to his chest. I felt his breath change. His arms came around me, not possession, shelter, chosen every day, not once. Out front, Paolo whispered much too loudly, "If anyone asks, I saw nothing except wholesale emotional misconduct." Maria whispered back. "Carry the figs. I'm carrying them with deep pain," Leo snorted. I drew away enough to look up at Dante. "Were you ever going to drink that?" "No, so this was manipulation." "Yes, criminal. One of my stronger skills." I laughed again, quieter this time. And he touched the flower on my cheek with his thumb. Later, when the doors opened and the first customers came in under the smell of coffee and browned butter, he stayed. Not all day. His world would never allow that. There were calls to make, men to warn, accounts to watch. Shadows still lived where his name lived. But for 1 hour, he leaned against my counter while I glazed fig tarts, and every so often his signet ring tapped softly against the crystal glass he had left near the register. Click. Not warning now. Memory, click, not threat, home. At 8:15 he finally stood to leave. He kissed my temple in full view of the front window, which made an elderly customer nearly drop her biscotti in delight. At the door, he looked back once. I lifted the pastry brush in salute. He smiled, small, private, devastating. And when the bell rang behind him and the morning rushed in to fill the space he left, I understood something I still don't know how to solve cleanly. Love had not made his world gentler. It had only made me willing to stand inside it and call some part of it mine. Maybe that was courage. Maybe it was ruin with better lighting. Either way, when he returned that night and touched the crystal with his ring just to hear me laugh, I knew the sound would undo me for the rest of my life. "Welcome home, little spark," he said. And this time it did.